Hello, everyone. I'm Original Book Nerd, and today I'm with author Stacy LP, and we are going to talk about Afterglow, Rising from the Ashes, which is book one in her Afterglow Rising trilogy. So this is a kind of sci-fi space fantasy romance, and it's post-apocalyptic. So for you post-apocalyptic fans, this one is a good one for you if you want to touch your toes into a more like sci-fi and fantasy realm as well. And the first question I have for Stacy today is, when you knew that this was the series you were going to go, how long did it take you to map out this post-apocalyptic world you've created in this book?
Yeah, so I don't have space, but I do have aliens. The way that the story kind of came about is my friends and I were just talking one day and we're like, what kind of stories haven't we seen? And we started talking about how we love those like post apocalyptic stories, but it's always during the height of whatever's happening. So every alien invasion movie that I remember seeing, it was always the aliens are coming and then they're here and then we've defeated them and they're gone. But what happens when they win? So I started digging into that idea of so the aliens came, they conquered, and then one day they just up and left. So then what? Live in Austin, Texas, and I thought it would be really cool to kind of build that into the story because there are all of these real locations that I don't know if you remember during COVID driving around when everyone was in quarantine, but everything was just so eerily quiet and empty. And I feel like that's almost more scary than if you're taken to like this other planet or other place where everything's kind of an unknown.
It's funny you mentioned how everything went eerily quiet because when you said that, the first thing that comes to mind is that there's a photographer who, in the middle of COVID, when everything shut down, gone to like the hot spots in the US and they had taken pictures, at Golden Gate Bridge, at the Seattle Bean, at the Times Square,
Hmm.
at the Alamo in San Antonio, at these big, like iconic places in the US that on a good day have a couple thousand people, but on a bad day have, close to 1 million people in and out of them. And those pictures are just like you see like tumbleweeds in the background because it's just gone. Everyone's gone. And for you to say that, and that's just how I've always, post-apocalyptic books are one of my favorite type of romances. I always enjoy how an author gets into that mindset, and coming out of COVID, there was so many that, you know, they get that eerily, like everything. What would happen if, no one was outside?
Yeah. And
And
I
that
love
was
those what if questions. Like, that's kind of what gets me going. I'll be like, well, what if? What if the aliens came and left? What if they took some people, but then other people weren't taken? And then what did they do to those people that they did take? And then what happens when they come back together?
so going off what you just finished. One of the taglines in the book does mention how they come and go, but the big war with the aliens and the human race, that's not over yet. Just because they've stepped off, what they have, ground zero, it is still very much going on. How did you toggle the balance of, keeping the anticipation of building that moment because we know they're going to come back at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Something is going to happen, but also developing a story to where we still had stuff we wanted to know while we were leading up to this big, like, moment of what's gonna happen.
So, one of the things that I really enjoyed about writing this story was I'm coming in as someone that I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything about, like, well, not anything, but I don't know a ton about what life on other planets might be like or how someone would be able to survive these medical situations that they're thrown into. So, coming in as just a regular person, I thought, if I was in this situation, how would I feel? And what would I do next? And then depending on characters' how might someone different react to whatever situation they're in? So, as my characters are going through the story, they're kind of learning everything that happens along the way. So one of my main characters is someone who was abducted during the initial invasion. So for the entire time the aliens were there, she just was unconscious, supposedly. So she doesn't remember anything. So she's waking up in this world where she has no idea what happens. And then slowly her memories start coming back together. And I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going?
She just woke
Right.
up.
She just woke up. So, since there are so many unknowns, I think a lot of the questions that the reader has are also questions that the main character has. And as they're kind of going through the story together, they're learning different pieces of what happens during the invasion and finding different groups that had other experiences that kind of give you other pieces of this puzzle. Because one of the big questions was like when the aliens left is like, are they gonna come back? Is this the end or is there more?
So this isn't an amnesia romance because she wasn't, she didn't just forget, she was unconscious. But it almost, starts as a amnesia-like romance because she has no recollection of, what happened? What world did I wake up in? And I enjoyed her mind. Alina has a very interesting mind in this book, how she pieces things together, how she knows like something's not right. I need to question this. But also like the innate curiosity that you wrote in her because she also has this curiosity to know who they are, like
Yeah.
to see one herself, to meet the aliens, even against, probably her better judgment. She knows, deep down, this is not a great desire I have, but she's like, but I really want to know because she missed out on it.
Right.
Did you always know that was how you were going to develop her character, though?
No idea. I went into the story with an outline and a direction that the story was gonna head in, and it did not follow that path. So even when I was thinking about who my main characters were, I rewrote the intro, the first couple of chapters, multiple times because they as I kept writing, I started getting to know the characters more, and then I'd go back and I'd be like, this isn't like what they would actually do now that I know them. So a lot of it changed over time, and by the end of the book, like, I feel like that's the point when they felt like real people. So I was able to kind of go back and make sure that that character growth consistency and the traits that they have were consistent with how they were at the beginning, but then what their personal journey was, how did they grow and how did they build on that?
And I know people who've read this want me to ask, even though I don't know, book two's not out yet, correct? Or is it out
Not
now?
yet, no.
Okay, so they want to know potential romance in the book. Will Alina be paired with one of these aliens?
No.
Okay.
She will not be with an alien. I am so sorry for anyone who was hoping. But there are some types of companionships that do form with some of the alien creatures that you're just gonna have to see how that turns out.
And another one they wanted me to ask, and that I kind of saw in some of the early reviews. This so it's an alien book with romance in it, but it's not necessarily, an alien, the typical alien style romances that we've seen pop up in the past year. How would you describe the aliens that you invented in this universe?
Yeah, so there are a couple different kinds, and without giving too much away. So, when I thought of the invaders and who they were and why they were here, so the aliens, when I thought about who they were and where they came from, and even something like how do they communicate, one thing that I kept coming back to is what scares me the most is the unknown. Kind of like when I think back to watching Paranormal Activity for the first time, and you don't see whatever ghost or demon is attacking them, you just kind of see what happens. And then it's up to your imagination to kind of fill in those blanks, which for me is way more terrifying than something I could see on the screen. So I didn't want it to be that mysterious where readers can't get that picture in their heads. So when I describe the aliens, it is from the point of view of people who were kind of surviving the entire time. My second group of characters, they are the ones who have been around since the beginning of the invasion. They've been running, hiding, fighting, just trying to live. And when they think back, everyone kind of has different experiences with the invaders because not everyone has even seen them. Because when you think about that kind of public panic or like mass panic, that kind of messes with your memory sometimes because you don't know what memories are coming from what you actually experienced versus the stories you've been told. And in this world, like they don't have any access to communication devices. So they're getting all of these facts by word of mouth. So there is that concept of the unreliable narrator that comes in because you are relying on a lot of memories to get the full picture. So, from the characters who have, there are characters who have seen the aliens, and they do give descriptions though, because I don't want to be too mysterious. So, keeping that kind of ominous, what's under the mask kind of feel, I thought more about what's the presence that they have when they're in front of you, and what would make someone scared. So, I pictured this just giant, hulking, stocky creature that maybe they're walking on two legs, maybe they're walking on four legs, or maybe there are some that walk on eight legs. And as they're going through the city, like, are they saying anything? Are they communicating with each other? And when I thought about how they communicate, that's something that I really got stuck on because I didn't want it to be so obvious what they were doing. So that's kind of how I got down this train of thought of like, what if the communication happens internally? And what if they are connected through their minds? And that's how they're coordinating these attacks, because that would keep their stealth. That would keep their plans from any people from figuring out this means this or that means that when they say it. And they're kind of built into, not literally built into, but they're always in these suits that they came down from. So they have that extra unknown layer to them where when you're looking in their visor, you see a reflection of yourself. You don't even see through to who's on the other side. I kind of played around a lot with that when it comes to the invaders and what they look like. But we also have my favorite creatures, which I call the hell creatures lovingly. And those you get to see up close and personal.
So for this style of romance, you did two really big topics. You had first the aliens, which they're a romance subgenre all in their own. And you did post-apocalyptic, which also is a subgenre really all in its own. How do you balance between not having it too, alien dominated, but also not going too crazy with the post-apocalyptic?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that question actually. So I I didn't know that I was going to go into writing sci-fi. I've always enjoyed, sci-fi movies, I've read sci-fi books, and I've always kind of gravitated towards that post-apocalyptic dystopian vibe. And when it comes to the balance between, because there are like a couple different pieces. And my background in literature, I have a master's in English lit, but I also love to read. So I will read anything and everything. And I feel like that has had kind of an impact on how I write and how I build in these different elements. So I like to call my book light sci-fi because it's not so heavily focused on the sciencey part. It's there, but most of the focus is on the characters and their journey. And bringing in the aliens, I liked that I didn't make them the primary focus about what are they doing, but rather how do we survive this? Because that was the relatable part for me is when you're thrown into this situation and the world is literally ending, what do you do? So I kind of took it from that angle where I focus very heavily on the characters' journeys and their personal struggles and with a lot of what they experience, there's a lot of collective trauma that they're working through. So, how do you balance the personal ambitions and the personal things that are holding you back from what's the greater importance, which is survival? So, it focuses a lot on that aspect.
As someone who reads, apocalyptic, like I said at the beginning, is one of my favorite subgenres to read. I have to be really careful when I read it because sometimes post-apocalyptic can go dark.
Oh, yeah.
And it goes dark sometimes in the way where I need mental breaks to read because I am a dark romance fan in the sense that the romance itself can be dark, but the plot lines, I don't always like them to be super, super dark.
Yeah.
And in post-apocalyptic, I mean, it's a lawless no man's land. So it can go like 0 to 100 like really fast. And that was one area I enjoyed in your book because while this is post-apocalyptic, we still see hints of, what humanity could be if it was ever, if they ever decided to fight back again and gain control again. Even though we also see the other end, but it's not as like in your face as it can be sometimes. Was that always your plan going in, or can we expect to see it grow darker as we go on? Like as you get farther and farther from point zero where essentially modern time ended.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, kind of easing the reader into the world and the experience, that was very intentional. It does start off very heavy on the action, but I didn't want it to be so overwhelming that it's your primary focus. Because I think that there is a delicate balance between this is something crazy that's happening in the world and this is too crazy, I like need to step away and then maybe I'll go back to it. So I my writing style, I like to make myself laugh. So I built in, without even intending to, these lighter moments throughout the book where the characters are able to kind of be themselves and have that break too. Because after a certain point, when you're going through high action, high action, high action, high action, like you need that break in the book too. And I didn't want to overwhelm my characters entirely because they need something to live for. And if you only show them the like dark sides of this world, then why do they want to go on? So exploring some of those like lighter moments where maybe they're teaching each other things about how to survive in the wild, or my characters like to joke and laugh through trauma sometimes too. So it kind of allows for that pause between the wild action and my gosh, like this place is like dark. And like you said, those like pieces of who they used to be. I will say in book two, there are more dark moments because we are getting to know some groups who made different choices throughout the invasion. And they aren't necessarily someone that you would want to be allied with. And as they're confronting these other groups of people, they still have the alien side of the danger that they're dealing with. So it kind of also runs into that conflict of, who is the enemy? Who is the greater enemy? And when you can't rely on the people that you're coming to meet in this new world, then again, like how do you take that direction? Do you just go with the flow because that's the direction society's headed in, or do you do something about it? And as they start to learn exactly what happens to the abductees, that's another part of it too, because they've been taken from society. Something happened to them, and then they're dropped back in. But they're that constant reminder of something bad happened to us, and you're a piece of it that's left over. So there's a lot of different things going on there, but I like to build in the lighter moments.
With the abductees and the aliens, will we ever see points of view from either of those, populations? Because they offer a almost 360 in the terms of, they're not necessarily always on Earth. Something else is going on, and they can add behind the scenes, like put pieces together you wouldn't get if you were just straight getting, this is the survivor land and these are who we're gonna see.
Yes. And I'm very excited to talk about this because that's a lot of what happens in book two. So you do get that perspective from some of the aliens, and they help to fill in some of the blanks that the people can't because they just don't have the knowledge. So that was really fun to dive into for me because it really tested my creativity while keeping it believable while also keeping it interesting and different and not something that we've just kind of recycled ideas that we've just done before. So the way that it happens isn't really what you'd expect. So that part, I can't say too much about it, but when it happens, it's coming off of this super high emotional moment where like adrenaline's high and one of the main characters experience a very emotional event, and then you get this perspective of another world and the journey to come to Earth. And that was really cool to dive into because it kind of expanded the universe for me. Because until that point, I'd thought about where did these extraterrestrials come from, but I hadn't fully mapped it out because I wanted it to align with the story. And when I'm writing, the story kind of comes as I'm writing it, even if I have the direction that I'm headed in. So I wanted to make sure that that window is wide open with possibilities.
As far as, like you said, book two is going to reveal a lot of things we haven't seen yet. I saw this question floating around in some of the early reviews that I was reading through to kind of like refresh my memory since it's been a moment since I first read book one. And one of the questions was, while you describe vaguely what these aliens look like and how they were perceived when they first invaded before everything went post-apocalyptic. Are we going to get more concrete? Like, how are we supposed to be imagining these aliens? Are they more humanoid or like, are they more like, alien?
Yeah, yeah. Short answer, yes. So that is going to be more heavily built into book two, which was kind of always the plan. I really wanted book one to feel like kind of like ease you in, because a lot of my readers that I connected with, they don't typically pick up like sci-fi novels. They will read fantasy or like romance, contemporary fiction. I mean, you name it, like any genre, and they probably come from that. So I wanted to make it beginner friendly, I guess. So using those methods of character development and connecting with the characters and slowly easing into the more complex situations that they've been a part of. So the aliens were also part of that too, because I think you have to kind of feel more immersed in the world before you're invested in continuing on, okay, so like this other unknown, like tell me about that. So I really wanted to focus on building up that anticipation and without revealing too much too quickly, but also like giving pieces so at least you have the start of the puzzle. Because this is something that as the series goes on, their aliens do become more prevalent throughout the books too. So it's kind of a way to like mesh the worlds together.
As far as meshing worlds together, would you ever, after this trilogy was finished, do a spin-off where we see the other side of where do they go after they leave? And what is their homeworld like now that, not only are they taking, prisoners, but after the trilogy ends, we're going to see how everything plays out. But would you ever go back to kind of what caused them to do this in the first place? And what environment are they coming from?
Yeah. I've thought about it. There's definitely the potential there. I have some other novella ideas and companion pieces that are already in the works because I cannot be tamed. So I think down the line, it is a possibility. It's not something I'm planning on at the moment, but it is an aspect of the story that I've always been very interested in seeing. Like, where did they start? So TBD there, but there will be things coming.
This was another question, and don't hate me for asking it, but it's one I think a lot of people who are big into the more alien monster romance were questioning. So typically in these style romances, when we introduce a foreign species, we can expect them to be different with how they're made. And a question I saw over and over again, or maybe not styled as a question, but kind of like, it had the makings of a question, was as far as the romance aspect goes with the aliens, are they different than humans? And you know exactly what I am getting at. So I don't have to go more in detail than that.
So they don't get that far in their relationship. But they are physically, like, very different than anything you've seen on Earth. Like, one of my creatures kind of built like a cat, but with 8 legs, and it has these, like, glowing stripes, but then it also has many, many eyes and jaws that unhinge, and there is they there's more to them than it seems. But a lot of the bonds between the aliens and the humans, it's kind of focused more on that coexisting type of aspect. Like, is there a world where we do coexist or where this becomes normal, where maybe humans are not the apex predator anymore, but this new species is, and we just learn to adapt? So, as far as parts go, I'm sure they're very different. I would not want to find out though.
Will we see Elena step more into who, or Alina step more into who she will become? Because she has the makings of almost becoming more of a leader in book
Yeah.
one and really stepping into her own as we go into this series.
Yes. In book two, Alina is put through some very intense challenges where she doesn't have the usual coping mechanisms that she falls back to. And because of being taken out of that comfort zone in a very uncomfortable situation, she has to kind of change the way that she approaches things, which I think is something that is really interesting in these types of stories where you already have this world that is post apocalyptic and dark and wild things are happening all the time. And these characters do have to change and adapt in order to survive. So Alina definitely does go through a transformation in book two, and I love the direction that she's headed in. I love her so much. But I think there's more focus on who she is as an individual and how she uses her own strength to move forward and get herself out of the situation that she's in.
As far as book one goes, do you have any like favorite parts or parts that just like hit home after you wrote like that ending to the scene?
So many. I have definitely sobbed while editing, writing, reading back. But there are a couple scenes that pop into mind. And there's this one where one of this not side characters, they're part of the main cast. His name is Brian, and I think he might be my favorite character. So Brian is, I feel like he's just sunshine, like this wonderful character. He's such a good person to be around, has a big heart, supports everyone in the group, sticks up for what's right. But that's not all that he is. And at this point in the book, it's kind of where a lot of things come crashing down. And Brian is outside, keep because they have shifts to keep watch at night to make sure that they're safe. So Brian is on a watch shift with Carter, the male main character. And Carter is very emotionally closed off, kind of prickly on the outside, but he does kind of build these relationships with the other characters that kind of come about without him even realizing. And Brian is someone that has a very major effect on him when it comes to how he empathizes with others and looking at this is what this person needs, so I'm going to shift how I react to help them through this. So in this scene, Brian is going through just some very introspective, I guess, conflict because he does care so much. And that's a good thing, but it can also be something that weighs so, so heavy, especially in a world where your friends are not guaranteed to survive. So as he's kind of talking through this, he's reflecting on what his life was like and what his friendships were like before the invasion and how he still felt that way. But at the same time, he also felt disconnected from the people that he cared about because he never fully got that in return. So as Carter is listening and like asking questions and just like showing that he notices that Brian isn't okay and he doesn't know how to fix it, but he wants to be there. Like that
Mhm.
act alone is something that gives Brian something that he didn't have in the world before it ended. So the interesting thing about a lot of these characters is in some ways, they're also getting everything they ever wanted but in this world where like you don't know what's going to happen next. And the way that Brian was talking about his experience and how he felt and how he relates to people, like it just kind of ripped my heart out, but especially as Carter was reacting to it because he is kind of coming into his own and learning what to do with these more difficult emotions that he used to push back down. So it's a very big moment of growth, but it's the scene that I always end up going back to because the relationship between the characters, there are so many spoken and unspoken moments in that chapter that speak to how this group connects to each other in different ways and helps each other move forward.
Can we expect to see more of those breakthroughs from some of the side characters going into book two? Now that we kind of have a sense of who some of them might be.
Yes. I really like multi-perspective books. One something that I studied when I was in school, I was very, very, very into postmodernism, and that kind of affected my writing style because I do enjoy the unreliable narrator and disjointed storytelling and multiple perspectives where you might get a slightly different story from someone else because our human experience is different. So I think I always knew that I wanted to add in some of those perspectives as the series goes on. So there are a couple new perspectives that I'm building into book two, and there will also be more in book three.
For as far as world building goes, you set the stage really well in book one. Will we get more of the nuances going forward with, smaller aspects of how far did this invasion go and how war torn are different areas as we progress? Because, in post apocalyptic books, it would be nice and tidy if the characters stayed in that one place and never
Right.
left. But that's not human nature. We are travelers, and characters that are in modern society and then it gets thrown back. The first thing you always want to do is, you know, where's my best friend? Where's, person XYZ? Did this happen there? Are we going to start seeing other places and, see how far this actually went out?
Do you see how excited I'm getting for every single question? Yes. Yes, we absolutely will be seeing more of this world. To your point, a lot of these characters, like, they are wondering, "What happened to my family?" They didn't start out in Austin, Texas. Austin is an area where a lot of people move to from other places, like, I'm originally from New York. So, you have people with family in many other states, and in book one, you do see them questioning, like, I wonder what happens to them because all of their communication was cut off. So there is that aspect that they're still trying to figure out, how do I even know if the people I cared about before all this are still around? But also, you get more pieces of how the invasion affected different parts of the world. And because the way that what happened in smaller towns was different than what happened in the larger cities. And then there are also those locations like the state park in book one, where it almost feels like it's completely untouched because it's nature. And the aliens didn't really have a need for it, so they didn't do anything with it. They just kind of flew over it and were like, okay, like that could stay. They were primarily focused on the people. So it's interesting to kind of explore those different locations from the lens of when you have the state park that is so familiar and it feels like you're back in the old world, but then you kind of come out of that into a new setting. What does that look like? And also, like, some of the groups that have formed outside of the city, because there are a lot of different factions of people who living together, working together, forming alliances, and the way that they've survived is very different from what our characters experience. It's there's yes. We're gonna see way more, way more of the world that they're a part of.
It's interesting you mention the difference between the small town aspect, and the big city mindset. Because which one to you would have the most devastating effect if something like this were to happen? And most people would say, it's going to be the small town because they tend to be out of the way. There's fewer people, there's fewer resources, and sometimes they're traveling quite a bit, just to go to the grocery store.
Right.
But it's funny because when you immediately say that, then you think, but on something like this, they don't have a lot of people. There's not going to be that immediate competition for necessity because a small town's going to band together a lot quicker. They're going to know that, you know your neighbor, you know the town, like everyone's going to know each other. So then the second response is going to be, it's going to be the big city because do you know your neighbor? And like, let's say you put them in New York or San Francisco. How
Right.
well do you know your neighbor? How well do you know the person across the street? The answer is not going to be as well. And then you also have the toppling of the city, the infrastructure. You have millions of people now in this sense who don't have a job, who are all fighting for, the same medicine, the same food, the same supplies, and that breeds a different type of ruthlessness.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas the big city might not go lawless quite as fast because of the stuff and the support they had. They might be a lot different when they do because of all that stuff
Right.
they have, because they're going to be the mecca
Yeah.
and they're going to be, well, why should we let you in?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, a small town might divert faster. They
Yeah.
might not have laws, but they're going to band together a lot differently than, the person you see at the grocery store. And it goes back to how well do you know your neighbor and how
Yeah.
much do you trust your best friend?
Mhm.
Which I'm excited going into book 2, how you start, expanding and divulging like how these different areas were impacted. Did any of the aliens stay? Did they all leave?
Yeah.
Like, are we going to see how, society crumbled or how it built itself back up?
Mhm.
Which those are my two favorite questions when I read post-apocalyptic books because every author does it differently.
Yeah.
And the tracks they go, no one is the same. It's not like romantasy where the basic structure is usually, either a sheltered heroine or like a really fierce, like, this is my crown, I'm not going to give it away. And then everything that leads after that. Post-apocalyptic can go any which way. Well, this is an alien invasion. That's how society crumbled because they got invaded by outsiders. But it all starts with, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And what did that event lead to as it rippled out, you know, and took everything with it?
Right.
And so that was my TED Talk. But the question I was leading into was when you wrote the blurb for book 1, the main tagline was "They came without warning, darkening our skies." Can you tell us what your tagline for book 2 is, if you're allowed to tell us yet?
Yes, the end of the world was only the beginning.
Which, again, my TED Talk fell right into that. When you're choosing how to, like, end book 1, because this is a trilogy, did you always know book 1 was gonna end where it was gonna end?
I did not. I had a lot more planned out for book 1, but it was getting very long. So I had to kind of pick a point where it's like, you have enough of the story where there's still going to be a reason to continue, but some of the immediate questions are answered and you're getting some type of closure at the end. It's not the closure that people are going to want because it does end on a cliffhanger. Sorry, not sorry. So there's a pretty major cliffhanger at the end of book 1 leading into book 2, and I hadn't planned on that at all. But it felt like a natural point to end because the questions change throughout book 1, what you're asking and the answers that you're looking to find. And at that point, it's a very pivotal moment because their entire experience is about to change and they're about to learn more. They're about to expand their worlds. And to lead into any of that, it would take a lot more pages, a lot more words. So it felt like a natural place to end, even though you will want to scream.
When you plotted out, the storyline, was it always set to be 3 books, or was it originally gonna be 1 or 2?
That's the interesting part because when I was coming up with the concept for this story, I had no idea if I would even be able to finish writing a book. I was just like, this would be a cool idea. And I was like, and you know what? It would have to be a trilogy. So when I decided to go into writing it, I knew it was going to be a trilogy, even when I hadn't had the full plot outlined, because the way I see it as like these types of stories, they do kind of come in three pieces, like the beginning of whether it's the beginning of the apocalypse or the beginning of the character's journey. Then you have the mid part where you know the characters that are involved and you're invested in their journey, but maybe their goals change and they're dealing with this change in direction. And then there's the end where they're looking for that way to move forward and how to get there. So I kind of broke it up like that when I was outlining, where book one is you're learning about what happened at a very basic level. Book two, you're getting more information on who are the aliens? Why are they here? Are they coming back? And what happens to the rest of society? How did they react to all of this stuff happening? And what conflicts did that cause? And then going into book three, there's that cool. So now that we know all this, what do we do now? And how do we get back to the place where humanity feels like humanity?
With post-apocalyptic romance, are we gonna expect, a type of happily ever after to occur at the end of this trilogy?
There will be some type, but there will be some heartbreak in between. So I do give a disclaimer at the beginning of my book, since it is an apocalypse story, that happy endings are not guaranteed, but there will be that sense of closure. And the ending that I do have in mind, I think that it will make you feel that hope and that connection, and like things are going to be okay and love can still exist and relationships between people aren't hopeless and we can move forward. It's definitely a slow burn and there are definitely some love triangle aspects in there too. So it's a journey to get there, but you definitely have to go through all three books to get that ending.
Am trying to I wanna say one, I really like how you're not gonna give us a tidied up HEA, and I'm trying to find this other author, but I can't remember her name, and I don't think I'm gonna find it, but it was a really good one. That is my biggest, it's my biggest pet peeve in post-apocalyptic books, because as a romance reader, you want that happily ever after, and you want to know, everything's been settled.
Hmm.
But it's also my favorite part because it's the only genre I will read where the happily ever after is not a pretty neat bow and
Yeah.
everyone's on their merry little way.
Hmm.
It's my biggest pet peeve when you read one and then everything suddenly turns out,
Yeah.
good for everyone. I'm like, that's not gonna happen. Like,
Right.
you're losing modern society. Everyone's not gonna survive. You know, you there's there's things like a simple cut now can kill you.
Scary.
People go lawless, like we've said.
Mhm.
You don't just have to fear the animals or, fear the unknown. Now you have to fear, your neighbor, your friend. You even have to at some base level, you begin to fear your non-immediate family,
Yeah.
or in some cases, the immediate family. And I was trying to find this book because it doesn't have aliens in it, but the way you structured, the groups of characters in this reminded me of how she structured her, because she also had a really strong female who, when you first meet her, you would never say, "This girl's gonna lead."
Yeah.
But then as you read her story, you begin to say, "No, this is gonna be the character that you need to watch for, because she is going to, have her moment where everything clicks into place, and you're not gonna wanna be on the other side of that, fierce, protective mode character going at it." And that's kind of we see the glimpses in Alina in this book. We see how, she wakes up with no memory. She has no idea what is happening. She is thrown into this world alone, which being alone is terrifying when you know what's going on. The sense of loneliness has been very prevalent in a lot of romance books in 2024 going into 2025. Not in this sense, because not a lot of people tackle, alien invasion post-apocalyptic, but just the feeling of it. Because she didn't just wake up feeling alone. She had those, underlying worries before everything happened, and this is just, amplifying everything. And as does some things in this book, as certain characters come into play, as events get revealed, we see how she's taking that weakness and almost making it her strength because she doesn't have the same fears as everyone else, because she doesn't remember it. So there's things that she just can't make herself fear because she doesn't know. And I was curious, so when you started creating and like really diving into what her story in this first part was going to be, how did you decide balancing what she was going to be afraid of and what she was going to, in a sense, just say, well, we have to do this anyway?
Yeah.
There's certain things you just can't get around.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was one of the most fun parts because since she doesn't experience the entire invasion, she doesn't have the level of trauma that the other characters have. She absolutely has trauma because she wakes up in a place that is not that great. But at the same time, like she has all those questions about what happens to the people that she cares about most. And she kind of like the people that she's looking for are the people that have been in her life, like, her entire life. Like, her best friend, Emma, is a very important piece. The book starts off with a memory of the 2 of them, and you get that connection immediately, and I feel like as Alina was going through it, like, she kept going back to, like, "What happened to Emma? Like, is Emma okay?" And that's kind of been her driving factor is there are choices that she has to make, and there are things that she's feeling that if this were the before times, she would know exactly how to handle it, exactly how to approach it. But the same rules don't apply in this case. So even something as simple as a potential love interest that wouldn't have been possible previously, now that door is open because every rule that you had was completely torn down. So she still feels that sense of loyalty and that sense of, I need to make the people around me like be happy because she is kind of a people pleaser too. And throughout the story, she does kind of have to draw that line and say, this isn't the world we live in now. And does it even matter, these old rules that we were following? Like, a lot of the rules around relationships and who you could be with and who you shouldn't be with, like, that's all out the window because you might die tomorrow. So, with that in mind, I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for the directions that she ends up taking for her own personal journey, but especially with her relationships.
So I don't want to spoil too much. So I think I'm going to leave the deep questions about Afterglow here and go into a few that I like to close out with. So, as an author, was there ever, an author in your childhood growing up, or a story, a book, or just a mentor who got you into, this is something I want to do?
Absolutely. I grew up, and growing up, my favorite series was Animorphs, surprise. And that's what really pulled me into, like, loving a series and being able to follow a character's journey beyond just one book. So, Animorphs, I think, is definitely where it started. And then as I was in high school, I found myself kind of drawn to more of that fantasy but urban fantasy where there's that line between like fairy tale and reality or like there are magical things happening but it's still the real world. And Francesca Leah Block is an author that I was obsessed with because I think she had that blurred line in her stories where it's so poetic the way that she describes what's happening and how the characters are feeling, and her writing style was very different from what I'd experienced because it did feel more stream of conscious almost. And being able to bring those fantastical elements into a very real world, that's something that I always felt like I was drawn to. And I think that's also something that I for some of the other pieces that I'm working on, like I definitely have been influenced by where like you're questioning, is there something more going on here, or is this in this person's head, or is this just how they're perceiving things? But also, there's David Foster Wallace and Mark Danielewski are two of my other authors that have had a big influence on me. They very different from the other two. Mark Danielewski, especially, he wrote this book called House of Leaves that I'm still obsessed with, but it had some of those like experimental stylistic elements that I always kind of wanted to bring into my story. And a big thing about House of Leaves is there are a lot of pieces of the book that exist outside of the book that you don't necessarily have to hunt down and find, but if you do, it just makes the experience that much deeper. And I noticed I started doing that with Afterglow too. So that's absolutely something that I've pulled in where like there are going to be companion pieces and there may be one companion piece in particular is going to be kind of a multi-perspective type of in the character's head experience for just to not spoil anything. And then like there's the playlist that also changes the reading experience. So stylistically, I would say like they've had the biggest influence on how I write. But then also too, I love so many authors, but when I started actively pursuing writing a novel and publishing, I obviously had no idea what I was doing. So I'm like, I need a group of people who will be able to go through this with me. So I went on Threads, I found a group of romance writers, and I became pretty good friends with like a bunch of them. So in particular, Lauren Lee and Chris Walters, they had already published books. So I have very much leaned into their experience and they've gotten on so many Zoom calls with me to where I'm like, okay, so I'm on Ingram Spark. What do I do? But also too, we beta read for each other, we arc read for each other, and we have a lot of writing sprints where we help each other like work through sticky parts of the plots and just like be that second pair of eyes, like, does this work? And I think that has had the biggest impact, honestly, is working with other indie authors because it's a very unique experience. We're kind of crafting this journey all on our own because there aren't any rules when you're an indie author. You're making them up as you go. And I think learning from other authors really helps to figure out how you want to build your brand and how you want to go about publishing and marketing and the direction you want to take your books in, even. So that is my list.
Has there been an aspect of this experience that, opened your eyes to, making this one of your careers?
Yeah, I always wanted to write a book. I never knew what it was going to be. Always been a book lover, was an English lit major. And when I started thinking about, okay, so now that I'm writing a book, do I go traditional publishing? Do I try to do it myself? And the more I read, the more I started realizing that I really like being in control and learning all the different pieces that go into making a book. And there are so many steps that I had no idea existed until I started getting in the process and I'm like, wait, but what's this? And what's that? And I have to do that. Like, I didn't know you had to purchase ISBNs. That was something fun to learn. Well, you can also get them for free on Amazon, but I wanted my own. Because it just gives you more options with what you do with your book. And I think the fact that it did kind of pose a challenge is what made me want to continue even more. Because it wasn't as simple as just writing a story, getting an editor to go through it, and then putting it on the internet or like printing it. There's the marketing aspect, there is cover design, there is the different types of editing that go into a book. And then after it's published, like you don't stop working on it either, because then you do figure out how does this tie into the rest of my work? And now how do I build my brand around the works that I do have out there, knowing what I'm also going to be working on in the future? And that's also a part that I really enjoyed because it has been this big puzzle to figure out. So it kind of expanded for me the options that I have to pursue my own career. And I worked at a tech startup before I started writing. They had a mass layoff, and that's kind of what sparked this whole thing. Is like, cool, well, now what? And before then, I always looked at it as being a published author is something that only happens to a select few. But with the resources we have, it does open so many more doors, even if you're the one opening the door for yourself. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I've had from this experience is you have to be the one to make it happen. So I think it's absolutely something I'm going to continue to pursue. I would love for this to be my full-time job one day. And I think that really just starts with being involved in the writing community and connecting with your readers and just continuing to go on.
Now that, well, it sounds like you're inside of book 2 right now, so I'll have to rephrase it differently. But when you have breaks, are there any books that you're excited to get to read yourself? And do you read fantasy, being someone who kind of writes in that gray area of not quite true fantasy and sci-fi, but, definitely has elements in those realms?
Hmm. Oh gosh, I read as I'm writing too. I can't stop. The end of 2024 going into 2025, I would say since at least not even the end. I would say since probably April, which is more the middle of 2024. My reading has switched because I do read a lot more from other indie authors now. And they have been primarily making up my TBRs because as you kind of get immersed in the indie author world as an indie author, like I love supporting my peers and I love seeing the stories that they put so much hard work into become a real life thing. Like I have a whole stack on a floating bookshelf next to me that is just my indie author friends. And I love reading everything that they create because it's so different from how I write. So I think having that difference in style and different focus in how they approach to the genre, it kind of like I do think that everything you read influences your writing, but it's different enough where it's like I can just step out and enjoy it because I'm not trying to compare it to what I'm writing. But then there are also books like the big ones that have come out, like Onyx Storm. I had to dedicate a weekend towards because I didn't want spoilers. One, but also like I have been waiting for that book for so long, as we all have.
I still am reading it. I know how it ends. Yeah, I know the big spoiler at the end. It was spoiled for me maybe 3 or 4 weeks before release, so I knew to release weeks how the book was gonna be perceived. So, my last question before we go, I always like to end here. Going into the final 2 books in this trilogy, what can you tell us are your most anticipated facts or parts as the author that you're excited to see for us readers?
Ooh, so many. There are a couple scenes that just kind of popped into my head before I got to them. And there's one in book 3 and one in book 2 that kind of mirror each other, but have very different outcomes. And they're scenes that it's going to hit hard. And I'm kind of nervous how people are going to react to it. But like, there are scenes that have kind of driven the story forward and how certain character arcs have been developing because I saw this moment. I'm like, this has to happen. Like, this happens. We just have to figure out what happens in between where I'm at and where this moment happens. But book 2, especially, seeing some of the characters build relationships and work together in ways that I didn't know they were going to. I'm very excited for readers to get to know the characters in that capacity because it's very different from what I saw coming.
I'm excited to dive into the rest of this series when it comes. And thank you for joining me on here today and talking about your book and some behind the scenes of what it's like to be an indie author. I know everyone's probably excited to see how Alina goes through her journey in this trilogy, as well as getting to see more about the aliens and who and what they are as this extraterrestrial race. I cannot wait to see how everything pans out